Step into the unknown with us, right here at Paranormal M. We bring you stories that'll make you question the very fabric of reality. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay current with our latest mind-bending narratives. By the way, we see and appreciate your comments. It helps us with that algorithm. We hope you have a thought-provoking time listening. Something weird that happened last night while helping out a friend get home. Haven't used Reddit in a while. Mainly use Twitter nowadays for my social media urges, but I didn't really know where else to put this, so I'm making a return. Last night I got a call from a military buddy. He was looking for a ride home from a bar. Didn't want to spend $30 on an Uber ride. I said sure. I was hungover myself, and figured it would help to drive with the windows down and get some air. It was probably 12:30 a.m. and I was driving around my neighborhood trying to take an alternative route that I hadn't taken before, but I did know about. Basically one that went through residential areas and stayed off the bigger, more populated routes. I didn't really want to fight traffic the entire way, getting downtown. So as I'm driving, everything was normal. I was listening to some random podcast about World War II. Then as I'm passing this one random house, a couple streets down from mine, there's a kid standing in the front yard right on the edge of the road. To be honest, this doesn't sound that weird, but looking back, it was past midnight and this kid was maybe 10 or 11 years old. He had on a red shirt, tan shorts, and sneakers with a blonde bowl cut. Totally normal-looking kid. So as I'm coming up to this kid, I get to a speed bump and had to slow down, so I was able to get a better look at him. He wasn't playing, he wasn't running around, no other kids were with him. He was just standing completely still and meeting my gaze as I'm going past. Like, the entire way down the street, he doesn't stop staring. And after I had passed him, I keep looking at my rearview mirror and he still doesn't stop looking. He doesn't cross the street or go back to playing around, he just keeps standing there staring at my truck. On the drive back, I told my friend after picking him up about the kid. He was interested, so I took him back the same way, where I saw the kid and he wasn't there. Fast forward to when me and my friend get back to my place. Sitting in my living room shooting the shit watching YouTube, and we hear this super fast, quiet knocking at the door. Like so quiet my AC almost completely smothered the sound. It's like 1:30 a.m. at this point, and both my roommates are out of town for a long weekend. So I was kind of wary of answering the door. I peek out the window next to the front door and I see no one there. Honestly, this could have been a tree limb hitting the roof near the front door, but in that moment, it was like I was having a heart attack thinking I'd see that kid there. Later, when I was in bed just lying there, I heard a few more random knocks in different places. My bedroom is right next to the front door and goes out onto the patio that the front door connects to. These knocks could have been at the front door or just in the same random spot in the house. At this point, I was so tired I really didn't care to worry about it, and I passed out. Waking up this morning thinking about those knocks creeped me out a bit more, but just doing a walkthrough in my front patio, nothing was out of the regular, so there's not much else to go on. Former King of Dreamland. In the spring of 84 or 85, I was 5 or 6. In a vision, I was picked by a pair of dream spirits. A black man and a doll-like girl approached me in a white void. They said they needed me to be the next king of the Colorado area Dreamland, as their old king had reached his limit of time that he could rule. As they continued, they explained it would be a 3-month reign, as they needed me to fill in until the next queen was old enough to handle it. Then the old king paraded out to meet me and hand over control. After the king had disappeared, I was led to a walled city called the City of Children's Dreams. It was a safe haven to keep adults' dreams from mixing with the dreams of children. And I guess you could say it was to keep their dreams pure. The two dream spirits started to take me on tour, but I felt compelled to jump off a cliff and onto a 4-poster bed that fell to the ground from quite some height, awakening me just as I hit the ground. For the next 3 months, every night my dreams were of the same land, which drew its strength to exist from me. Then I would feel compelled to jump off the same cliff every night and fall back to earth. As this went on for the 3 months, my strength began to falter, necessitating the city to shrink, and it shrank until only 5 houses remained. Then the girl that they had talked about took over from me. She was strong enough to last 1.5 years without the city shrinking. I truly believe it was some form of an astral plane of existence, and that the book Little Nemo in Dreamland was at least partly based on the writer's time as a king of Dreamland as a child. Story number 3. Man, this question has me recalling several very odd events that happened to me in my bedroom, specifically as a kid growing up. To keep on topic, there was this one time my parents left me home alone when I was only about 7. They were next door by the neighbor with my little sister for a birthday party, and I had asked if I could head home to play with my toys, since I was bored. It must have been about an hour into my playtime in my bedroom when I felt the atmosphere change. My ears popped and my hair stood on end as I quickly turned to my door to fully expect seeing somebody enter my room. You know that change of silence that you can hear if you close your eyes and you have somebody exit and enter a room? Can't explain it in any way better than that, but that's what I felt. Not thinking anything about it, I resumed playing with my Lego bricks. But thinking somebody was home now, I made my sound effects, explosions and such, softened to a whisper, so I can be more aware when somebody came home. In that bedroom I had this blue poofy-like carpet. And I'll never forget this, but as I whispered to my little Lego games, I got that eerie feeling again. I was sitting on the floor and can hear slow footsteps starting from behind me, walking to the side around the front of me. Being on carpet, it was this muffled-sounding footstep, but it was no less than a foot away from where I sat, as it walked in a circle around me. I was back across the street in the 4-year-old girly birthday party in a heartbeat. Story number 4. Ask Reddit. In the same room, around the same age, I slept on a wooden-framed bed that had a second bed that can slide out from underneath for any friends or family that slept over. The bed squeaked a lot if I tossed and turned, so much so that my parents in the room next door would be able to tell if I was awake. Anyways, my dad would play this game where he would sneak into my room toward the foot of my bed where he would be out of sight from where I lay, and shake it violently while making your generic ghostly sounds. It used to crack me up, and I loved springing out of my bed to jump on his back saying, "I caught you, I caught you." You know, just your usual dad and son fun and games. I remember clearly one night I woke up randomly in the night. Really not sure what time it was, but it must have been late since the house was in darkness and was dead quiet. I was laying there just staring at the ceiling when my bed slowly started to shake, wooden creaky noises and everything. I remember smiling and sneaking under my blanket to crawl to the foot of my bed, to counter-scare my dad. As I popped up to jump him, the bed stopped shaking, and nobody was at the foot of the bed. It couldn't be under the bed because there was no space there since the secondary bed was in place. I didn't think anything of it, figured it must have been a small earthquake, and went back to lie down. Not even a full minute elapsed, and the bed shook again, this time harder, That time I allowed it to continue for what felt like an eternity, and like before, I quickly jumped to the foot of my bed to catch the prankster, and as soon as I did, the bed stopped shaking again. At that point, the lights turned on and my mom walked in asking why I was making so much noise in the bed. They thought I was jumping in the bed or something based on what they heard next door. I don't recall trying to explain to them what happened, or was happening, to be honest, and that was the end of that experience for that night. The second experience that stands out to me, my friends and family make fun of to this day, and always ask me to retell the tale around people who haven't heard it. Same bedroom and maybe a year older, so about 8 to 9 years old. For Christmas, somebody had bought me this cool little toy robot. It has treads for feet, so we could drive around, claws for hands, and a disc-shaped head where the eyes were a red visor that would light up, and a big blue button on his head. When you pressed the button and said something, he recorded it and would play it back while driving around moving his hands up and down. I remember we had all the family over for Christmas and my grandfather was playing with the robot and me a good bit. We recorded all sorts of silly things for him to repeat. Some of my toys were kept on this red shelf my dad built for me that was nailed to the wall. Underneath, I had a long desk that almost covered the length of the room. My mom covered the whole desktop with the cutout family photos for us growing up, and then had a glass top fitted for the top of the desk. The toy robot was always kept up on this shelf. It was pretty high for me, and I would need access to climb to the top of the desk to access whatever toys or books that were on this shelf. A few nights after Christmas, I woke up from a deep sleep and I was laying in bed wondering what to do. Usually I'd just pick a few toys and play quietly as to not wake up my parents or my sister next door. My bed was on the opposite side of the bedroom from where this shelf was. As I rolled away from facing the wall to now face across the room, I saw the red visor's eyes turn on. I'll never forget how it was the only lit shelf in the area. The arms did a little up and down, moved for the robot to say, "Hello, Josh," my first name, and drove right off the small shelf and crashed down onto the desktop. It shattered into several pieces and even cracked the glass. I lay in bed just wide-eyed and stunned before I can even gather what just happened. Both my parents came sprinting into my room, turning on all the lights, and also looked startled. Great-grandfather's friend. This story has haunted my family for 4 generations. I visited my great-grandparents frequently as a small boy. My great-grandfather was a tall man with a sense of humor of a teenager. We genuinely connected, despite our obvious age gap. One day my grandparents left with me and him in the air, and it was kind of different in the house that day, you could say. He was more somber, and sat and appeared almost callous in his rocking chair. I was young, but I knew he was disturbed by something, and I just had to know what. So without thinking, I asked him rather bluntly, "What's got you all upset, old man?" I usually called him old man as a joke, and some part of me was hoping for a verbal jab might lighten the mood. Thankfully, this did seem to pull him from whatever mental ocean he was pondering. He grinned at me and said in a rather low voice, "What do you think? I was crazy if I told you a ghost story?" This was a weird and uncharacteristic thing for him, so I nearly stepped back. Some part of me thought that he was beginning to slip mentally, even though he had never shown any other signs. "No, I wouldn't think you were crazy." I wasn't actually sure if I believed this, to be honest. Part of me was scared that he might do something uncharacteristic. Something about older people going insane scared me a lot as a kid. I remember being freaked out by a Ben 10 episode with old people attacking the main characters. But he smirked at me and told me this. I grew up with a man named Jeremiah. He was my neighbor in the house beside this one when I was a kid. We played together when we were very young and were best friends throughout high school. I joined the military and he went to college. However, when I finally came home after being stationed in Japan for about 6 years, we reconnected. One weekend we decided to go hunting together. We planned the trip and were packing up the night before. When that morning came for us to leave, something in my stomach felt off. I felt nervous and I wasn't really sure why. The whole time driving, I couldn't settle my nerves and nearly called the whole thing off, thinking I had some kind of breakdown. However, I was finally able to swallow it and got us to where we needed to go. I parked the truck and Jeremiah parked next to my truck. He mentioned he was having some kind of motion sickness on the way to our spot. I mentioned I had similar symptoms and we shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was the road. Walking through the woods, I came across a clearing. I didn't remember when I originally set up the spot. The air felt light and it felt like every instinct I had told me to turn around and go home. I pushed through, and about halfway through the clearing I realized I had heard footsteps and breathing right behind me. The wind seemed to spiral around the clearing and my nerves finally broke and I wanted to leave. I told Jeremiah to step back a bit, but when I looked back he wasn't there. I called for him a bit and used the whistle I packed, hoping he would hear it and say something or whistle back. When he didn't, I ran towards where we were parked until I made it back to my truck. His truck was gone, and I immediately got upset that he just dumped me in the woods without saying anything. I drove back pissed and went to his house to figure out what was going on. When I got there, his parents were there. They passed the house on to him when he turned 20 and hadn't lived there in a few years. When I asked them about when Jeremiah would be back, they looked at me shocked, saying that they never had a son named Jeremiah. I was very confused by this and eventually started asking everyone else. Nobody had ever heard of him. He wasn't in our yearbooks or school pictures. The only evidence that he ever existed was the list of things that we packed for the camping trip that I still have. It's worn and old now, but it has his name and what he was expecting to bring. He looked a little downtrodden when he finished the story, and I didn't really know what to say. I remember hugging him and hoping that he wasn't losing it. When my grandfather picked me up to go back home, since I was raised by my grandparents, I told my grandfather that I thought his dad may be starting to need more help being looked after, and started to tell him the story that I was told before he cut me off. He isn't beginning to lose it just yet. He's been telling that story with that paper in his wallet since I was a kid. He told it to your dad when he was growing up as well. I believe him, or at least that he truly believes it. I didn't know how to take this since my grandfather didn't believe in ghosts, aliens, or cryptids. I still think about it sometimes since my great-grandfather has passed, and I still have the packing list for the hunting trip him and Jeremiah were supposed to go on. Story number 6. Man at the Window. I was raised in the rural South, where the shade from the forest cooled our house in the summertime. My childhood bedroom had a large window that started a foot off the ground and stood about 5 feet tall and was nearly 3 feet wide. When the sun was out, this window still placed an uneasy feeling in my stomach. Once the moon rose over our house, the window started watching you, waiting for you to drop your guard. What manner of threat it actually posed was questionable in reality, if any. But my instincts never really cared for that explanation, and I openly avoided it every night until I was finally asleep. Finally, the weather decided to switch from 90s every day to a mid-60s every day. The arrival of fall meant one thing for us every year. We would be raking leaves up from the year after school most days going forward. While picking up the leaves outside, I saw someone in a brown waterproof coat and camo hat staring in my window. I froze seeing this man staring into my room for several reasons. The first was that while my window was a foot off the ground from the floor inside, it was a solid 6 foot or more from the earth outside. His feet hung loosely and dangled on nothing like a bad Halloween decoration, but he was standing on nothing, as if someone had hung him by the neck from the roof of our house. I started walking away from him, just hoping not to give him any reason to notice me. Luckily, he seemed not to. I told my grandfather about the whole experience, and while he firmly did not believe in ghosts, he honored my word as a man that at least that's what I thought I saw. A few months later, I saw the exact same man at a gun show acting completely normal. I could see his face a bit better, and he had a scraggly black beard with white in it, and seemed to not notice me. Talking to my grandfather about it, he decided to try to talk to the man without mentioning the event, to see how he was, and he seemed completely normal. I still don't know what the fuck is going on, and I never got an explanation, but the anxiety of the window never left me. Story number 7. Please, I need someone to explain this. It started when I was 9, and I'm 20 now. My grandmother died, and it was the first time that someone close to me died, and during months after that, I saw her face every night in my closet. I don't think that it was the pareidolia because it was a bit glowing in the dark. You know, like when you're looking to the sun or a light and then you close your eyes? You can see some colorful shapes. It was exactly like that. Obviously, I was terrified by that, and I made a lot of nightmares because of it. One night I couldn't sleep, so I told everything to my mom. I was crying and I said, "Granny, I love you, but you're scaring me right now." And it never happened again. I've never known why it was happening. It wasn't some sleep paralysis. I've had some as a kid, and it has nothing to do with it. I could move, talk, and do everything. I don't think that I have any kind of gift unlike some people that were telling me because it never happened with someone else. As I said, I'm an atheist and don't believe in spirits, but I'm okay with the possibility that it could exist. I've just never found any evidence that could make me think that, except that strange story that I can't explain. Story number 8. That one shift too many. Through the early 2000s, I guess I worked a lot, usually 7 days a week. Sometimes 12 hours and above. I think the longest run was 7 weeks working 7 days, without a real rest. It's that particular run that I'm writing about. So for anyone that's read my previous post about the cat lady, I mentioned some sightings that happened in the place that I worked. Here's my own. I was coming to the end of a particularly long stint of working overtime. I'd been going for 7 weeks, and it was Sunday. It was getting late. I was doing shutdown and locking up, making sure everything was safe before leaving. This usually meant I was the last man standing and the last man out. I went through my usual routine, which was kind of like a circuit. First sign of things being off was a movement I caught on the edge of my peripheral vision. I turned to see what had caught my attention. Nothing there. My first reaction was that something was, I guess, just amiss. So I did what any 23-year-old guy does and picked something large and heavy up. I shouted a couple of times that I would phone the cops, try to scare the guy if there was a guy. Adrenaline was high. No reply. So I carried on shutting down. Going about getting home, Then I saw him. Just stood there. 30, maybe 40 yards away. Tall, black jacket, bald head. Just stood there. Only problem was he had no face. No nose, no eyes, no mouth. Now I'm super tired at this rate, so even though I'm blind, just panicking, I screwed my eyes shut, rubbed them hard, shook my head because that isn't possible, right? But he's still there, so I turned and walked the other way. I didn't run, but I was walking quick enough to maybe break into a run if I needed to. I got down the stairs pretty quickly, grabbed my coat and bag, set the alarm, and just out I went. I locked the door and I went home. Now I know what you think. He was tired, working too many hours, and was seeing stuff. I don't feel threatened by it, just to be clear. But it wasn't friendly, and it definitely didn't want me around. Now fast forward 3 months. Old colleague of mine walking down the stairs from the canteen one early morning. Just me and him there, as we were usually first in. He's white as a sheet, stuttering. I looked at him and just said, "Black coat, bald head, quite tall?" He nods, and we go outside to our coffees and I calm him down. There were a few sightings of whatever it was after that, mainly when people were on their own, mainly getting a feeling of unease. I'm glad I'm not there anymore, as it wasn't the last time that I saw him either. Story number 9. Walking by the Canal. There's stretches by the canal where I used to live that my grandfather always told me to stay away from. We used to walk on the old towpath to get to the city center when I was young, and he would always tell me stories of something, quote-unquote, that would pull me down to the bottom. He would never say, "Never get too close to the edge, she'll pull you down and keep you." And whenever I asked who he would say it was best, I didn't know. I would always sense his unease at times, as I spent a lot of time with him, and he was always earnest about me staying away from the edge of the canal bank. He'd tell me of the people who swam in it that drowned, or people that nearly drowned that he knew. And they all said that something at some stage had them just tried to pull them down. Whether that was true or not is my granddad's way of keeping me away from the edge of the canal and instilling a healthy fear of drowning in it. I don't know. But years later, something strange did happen on that towpath that stayed with me. It was the early hours of Saturday morning. My pal and I were walking back from a night spot, as usual. We spent all of our money and had no cab fare. The moon was up and lit the towpath well enough for us to walk down it and find our way to the footpath that would lead us home. So you'd be talking like a mile, maybe a mile and a half. We were dawdling as you do when you've had a few too many, kicking stones into the canal as we walked down. There's something serene about the moon on the still waters of the canal. It's like black glass, and it shows a lot of what's going on, so even the ripples from the stones could be seen. My friend was being silly as he walked. We were still charged and had energy to burn as we walked down, and kept asking me why I'd gone quiet. Now, as silly as it sounds, drunk or not, I realized we'd reached the spot near where my grandfather has always warned me not to go near. So I told my friend to stop messing about, and we'd end up in the water. And as I said that, I sort of retreated a bit to the other side of the towpath, so I was as far away as I could be from the edge and still be able to walk. My friend asked what the problem was again, and I shrugged and said that this part of the towpath puts me about. Something about it, I suppose. It was around that time that my friend decided that it would be funny to fake throw me in. Like I saved your life by shoving and catching you. Some silly bullshit that's probably got people in trouble somewhere, but seemed like a good idea at the time. As he did that, I think I must have had a couple of seconds where I was either hyper-aware or really wide-eyed. Because as he shoved me forward, I lurched toward the canal and looked straight down into it. And I saw what looked like an arm, bone white in the water, and the side of a head and maybe even an eye. Again, all bone white. As he pulled me back, he stopped laughing. He asked me what was wrong. Aside from you nearly killing me, nothing. I dream about that sometimes. Don't know if it was because I was drunk or maybe tired or maybe something that does in fact live in that canal. I do know that there are some places you should be very careful about, walking through. Story number 10. Never play with things that you don't understand. I was once at a friend's house a long while ago. You couldn't really call it a party, but there were a few people there and it was a social setting. A gathering may be a better term. I'm not good at these things and never have been. But the effort I have to go to maintain my social graces is quite exhausting for me the majority of time, so I tend to avoid them. I would have been around 19 at the time. There were around 8, maybe 9 people there, and it was a mixture of men and women. I guess we've all been to them at one time or another. One of the women that was there was kind of new agey, believed in the goddess, crystal healing, all that stuff. Which I'm not rubbishing, but in the 90s, some of this was a fad, So as the night wound on, she suggested that we did a Ouija board. Now I may or may not have mentioned this before, but I'm third generation Romani, and I was brought up in a family that respected the old ways. Now, if you know that you kind of know what I'm talking about with that, so in this kind of situation, I'm heading for the door. My friend whose party it was stopped me and kind of placated me, told me that I was being silly, and he actually did rubbish this woman and what she believed in, and said that it was a joke. So I stayed. It was, as it turned out, kind of being a big mistake. All around, in a lot of respects. I was sat at a distance from the table where they were, convened. She was sat with the planchette, asking if there was anyone there. People were smirking and generally just disrespecting the entire thing. She kept asking for signs or if anybody was there. That's when I started feeling uncomfortable. You ever get that feeling you're being watched or followed? It's like that. Like an itch behind your eyes, your scalp tingles and you get a feeling that you need to be moving, right now. It's an instinct bred and hardwired into you over thousands and thousands of years and generations. And then the planchette starts moving and she's smiling and all happy that it works. She doesn't look like a clown. So then they start asking simple questions. Will I be rich? Will I be famous? Answers are all no. Nothing unexpected, till a guy asks if he will be married. Then it spells out never. So he asks why. It spells out die young. All of a sudden things take a turn. I tell her to put it down and send it back. She didn't understand what I was telling her to do, and the damn thing is spelling car accident. He laughs it all off and goes and stands in the kitchen. And in the meantime, one of the women asks if she will have kids. It spells out never again. Now my instinct is telling me to leave, and I'm listening to it. I go and grab my coat, and as I'm leaving, the woman that's doing the board calls out, "Your granddad has a message for you." I stopped, walked back in and calmly said to her, "You have no idea what you're doing. You're a child with a box of matches, and whatever's talking to you is not my granddad." I smashed the board off the table and stormed out. In the years that passed, that guy was killed in a car accident with 3 other people. He was 23. The woman never did have children, and some of the other things, mainly the malicious shit, did come to pass. I don't know what it was. That stupid woman called in, right? To that. But I will say, don't play with things that call out to the dead. And if you do, make sure that what you call was human ones, because you never can be too careful. That message from my granddad, I never did hear it. And the woman that did the board, never did see her again. Story number 11. Ask Reddit. Where I live, there's an urban myth about this bridge that's about an hour or so away from my house. The myth goes like so. Years and years ago, there was this little girl that would be dropped off at this bridge to swim underneath the creek every day while her parents worked on their farm. One day, she drowned in the creek, never to be seen or heard of again. Sounds like classic bullshit, right? I thought the same. Legend has it if you drive to this bridge, park your car on it, cut your lights and the engine, and then honk 3 times, the little girl will come to your car, doing a multitude of things to gain entrance. Supposedly, this is how her parents would notify her that they had really returned to pick her up. Anyway, my friends and I heard of this myth and we thought it sounded absolutely ridiculous. There's no possible way this could be real. So we drove the hour it took to get to this bridge at about 2 a.m. We arrived at the bridge, parked our car on it, and cut the engine along with the lights. My friend who was driving honked the horn 3 times, and we sat in the pitch black darkness, eagerly waiting to disprove this silly story. A few minutes passed and nothing happened. And just as we were ready to give up, we all heard the sound of something tapping against the metal, and it came from the roof of the car. Immediately, we freaked out and got the hell out of there. We were trying to come up with logical reasons as to why we heard that noise, but couldn't really come up with anything. We stopped at a nearby gas station to refill the tank for the ride home, but before any of us got out of the car, my friend yelped. I turned to him and he was pointing at his window, and there was a small handprint there, too small to be any of ours. Regardless of that, I still took it as him trying to mess with me, and went to wipe it off as to say, "Nice try." Except when I did, the handprint was still there. The handprint was put on the window from the outside. And that wasn't the only handprint. Every single mirror of the car had handprints on them, even the side mirrors, all the same size and shape as the first one that we discovered. Suffice to say, I'm never going back to that bridge. Story number 12. My true story from 1 year ago, somewhere in Wales. I was staying with family in an old renovated stone cottage that was hundreds of years old, built on the vast grounds of a monastery that was destroyed during the dissolution by Henry VIII. The cottage was nestled on the edge of these grounds with a few more modern holiday homes. And this was at the foot of a great hill where an old ruined castle stand guard overlooking the landscape. It was a beautiful, scenic place with walking trails right on the doorstep. This house had been in the family for 80 years, and we stayed there so I could help with the renovation during the visit. It's their second house, and it's normally Airbnb'd, so this was our first and last stay here at this cottage. The spookiness began on the first night. I shared a room with my brother, as there was a lot of us staying there. He went to bed early. I went to bed around midnight. Trying to fall asleep, I heard heavy boot-like footsteps up in the Lawton attic. The boot steps would walk above my head to the far end of the house, stop for 10 minutes, then walk back above my head again to the other end. This pattern would repeat for hours. This was a very distinct pattern, far, far too heavy to be any animal walking around. The pacing was deliberate, the pause between each step long enough to suggest slow, wide strides. This occupied every night we were there, and my brother heard it too. I did try to record the sound, but it didn't come out very well. I would wake up in the middle of the night and it would still be there, walking back and forth. After 2 nights of this, I casually asked Granddad if this house had a loft. It did, inaccessible hatch over the stairs that would require a long ladder to reach, and his first response to that casual question was, "Why? Did you hear something?" I said yes, and explained what we had heard. Got a bit defensive and just said it was animals and rats up there. No small rodent-type animal could make that noise that we heard that I'm aware of. 1, 2, 3, 4 stars. Asterisks, excuse me. Final story from this trip that will be quick as it may have an explanation. On the final night, there was footsteps crushing on the stones out in front of the cottage around 11 p.m. This was a bit odd, so I checked out the window with a limited view and saw no one and no torchlight either. The footsteps faded away in the distance. Story number 13. I used to work at a locally famous haunted hotel. Small town hotel in England. The place has a lot of important local history, but no one would know if they had lived in the town. Locally famous, but the hotel was old, really in need of a refurbishment, and most rooms giving off an 80s vibe. I worked in the kitchen and the bar during my time, and it was common knowledge amongst staff that the hotel has multiple ghosts. I'm not going to get into details of all the supposed hauntings, but keep this focused on one event that I was present for. I need to make it clear that I did not ever witness anything at the hotel, but I was there and the first person to assist someone who did see something. I was working in the kitchen alone, late, cleaning after kitchen closing. This was around 11:30 p.m., and the staff was bare bones at this point. Upon arriving every day, you would go to the uniform storage area and get blue checkered trousers, aprons, and other protective gear for your shift. This was stored in a narrow hallway-style utility room, where the walk-in fridge was located and at the end of the hall. A room with washing machines and cleaning storage. A little window at the end of this room and hallway let in the eerie glow of the moonlight. Or on a dark, moonless night, the yellow glow of a Victorian-esque lamppost outside. This room was famously haunted, well known amongst staff. I suppose knowing this information would make it more likely for someone to think that they had seen something in there. It was immensely eerie, too, and the light switch was located halfway down the hallway, nearest to the washing machine section. So you'd have to walk in the glow of the moon or lamppost outside to the light switch. I'm sure this wasn't too healthy in the safety code, but it was what it was. In my 3 years working there, I never saw anything in this room. But that night I was working the late night block, and I heard a blood-howling scream, followed by one of the young service goers. He wrote that wrong. one of the young service girls who had been working there very long, rushing into the kitchen where I stood aloof. The manager was quite quick to come in to see what was happening. She was crying and trying to explain that she walked into the dark hallway and saw a giant shadow figure stood by the light of the window that she said started moving toward her. The imagery gives me chills to this day. She may have been influenced by the stories amongst staff and the local reputation of the hotel, but the absolute genuine fear I saw in her makes me believe that she did actually see the ghost that is said to lurk in the darkness of that hallway. Story number 14. My dead grandma saved my grandpa's life. My grandmother passed away in 2013 from pancreatic cancer. It was a long and painful battle, and at the end, she died in her home. My grandfather took care of her the entire time. He stayed by her side. He would get her up when she needed to use the bathroom. He bathed her, all of it. This was a very strenuous job, and by the time my grandma died, my grandpa started to have physical problems with the sheer exhaustion that he was just experiencing. One day after my grandma's passing, he was driving his car like usual and going towards a roundabout. That roundabout was right next to the graveyard where my grandma was buried. As my grandpa was going down the road, he started to have a heart attack and ended up crashing into the clock that was in the middle of the roundabout. He had an old car, so it didn't even have airbags installed. But this actually ended up saving his life, because when you have a heart attack, you need to get a compression or a hit to the chest hard enough to restart your heart. And that's exactly what his steering wheel did when he crashed his car. Now, the reason why everyone in my family believes that this was my grandma was because the next day after the car crash, my uncle went to visit my grandma at her grave. Context. My grandma's grave is built into a wall with a bunch of other graves, and right above all of them there's a long piece of concrete that gives them some shade from the sun. When my uncle went to visit her, he noticed that a chunk of the concrete was missing and was on the floor, and that chunk came from right above my grandma's grave. Mind you, in this period, my grandma and uncle went to go visit my grandma in the graveyard about every day. The reason why I didn't was because my family and I live in a different country. That piece of concrete did not fall before my grandpa's accident. They were certain of it. In my culture, we have a ceremony that we do 40 days after someone's death to make them go to the other side, because we believe that souls linger on earth for those 40 days, trying to finish unfinished business. And I believe this was my grandma repaying back my grandpa for all the hard work that he did for her when she was sick with cancer. She didn't want him to join her, at least so soon. I have a bunch of other stories when it comes to my grandma and all the things that she did after passing, but this is the most memorable one. Story number 15. Ask Reddit. I was about 17, staying the night at my brother's and his girlfriend's place. I slept on the floor in their room because the apartment was unbearably cold. It was December or January or something like that. My brother claimed for many years to have paranormal activities occur around him, claiming to have lived in haunted houses and seeing ghosts, things like that. Anyway, it's the middle of the night, and I'm woken up by a scratching sound coming from somewhere in the apartment. At first, I think it's the cat, but she's in the room with us. I'm overwhelmed by the most intense, full-bodied feeling of dread and fear that I'm beginning to cry. I can't explain it, but the fear was so intense that I thought I was going to die. The scratching continues. I mustered the courage to lift up my head. Remember, I'm lying on the floor. And I look towards my brother's bed when I see a dark humanoid outline sitting at the end of the bed. I'm in full panic mode and quickly hiding my head. My brother's girlfriend wakes up a few minutes later, also feeling quite scared. She later told us that she saw the shape of a foot of the bed, or rather saw a shape at the foot of the bed and felt like someone was sitting there. Pretty creepy stuff. Story number 16. Ask Reddit 1. Got an answer. It happened recently. This week, actually. I was walking through some woods. I don't live near the woods, it's just somewhere far from my house. And I felt a little off, and some strange things were also happening, such as birds suddenly flying away, bugs suddenly going silent, things like that. I decided to turn back as it was pitch black. I pretty much knew where the exit was, but I was worried that I'd ventured too far into the overgrowth. The trails were not very well worn, and it felt far from civilization. Eventually, I started hearing some leaves crunching. Thought it was just plants underneath my foot, but it wasn't in sync with my walking. But it was kind of trying to stay in sync, as if to trick me. I called out, but no one responded. Feeling creeped out, I got a little jog on, eventually finding a path that led out of the forest. But I felt like something was right behind me, and I was checking over my shoulder quite a lot. I've always been a little bit uncomfortable about walking alone, but at this moment felt straight up paranoid. It was then that I saw it, on one of my routines back. Checked my eye and I caught something. It was something quite wide and quite short, with a metallic body and a circular hole and window, a different colored spot in the middle. Too dark to really tell. It pursued me slowly and I bolted out of there. It seemed to be trying to communicate in some strange garbled noise, but I wasn't going to stick around and find out. So I got home, locked all the doors, and didn't sleep much. Not going back there in the dark anytime soon, that's for sure. Story number 17. My paranormal experiences. So back in July last year, I used a Spirit Box app because I was bored. My coworker said that it was legit. I first used it when he was around, and I couldn't understand anything, but he looked scared. Well, that weekend I had the house to myself, and I was in my room. I've learned to make out the sound of someone touching my doorknob, and that's what I heard. A few weeks later, I have the house to myself again, and I was in my room again, but this time I heard walking in the hallway. That night I used the Spirit Box app again, and the first thing I heard was my name. Now I'm using another Spirit Box app that my coworker told me about, and like a week ago me and him made out the word run. Also the employee bathroom that has a urinal that's used to not flushing by itself, it's automated. But 1 month it kept doing that and just randomly stopped for months. Starts back up last month. But one night I'm sitting in the bathroom trying to avoid people on break, and it flushed by itself 10+ times. I should note that the first month that it did this, it would only happen when I'd leave or enter the bathroom. This was a message I sent to my friend explaining my experiences, and a few days ago something else happened at work. I was messing with the shelf since I worked the night shift at the grocery store. Basically, I was in the aisle of a coworker and I heard a whisper directly in my ear saying my name. I know it wasn't my coworker, because she's a nice old Christian lady. Story number 18. Strange encounter in a national park in Australia. On Friday, I left work at lunchtime to go for an overnight bushwalk to a remote campsite in a national park that's about 60 kilometers from my work in Canberra. I decided not to take a tent as I was planning to sleep in a hut that has a fireplace, as it's still winter here. This hut is about 2 kilometers walk from any fire trails and it can only be reached by walking along a narrow foot track that climbs a hill for about 45 minutes. The hut only gets a handful of visitors each year due to how difficult it is to find and reach. My car was the only one in the car park, and I never passed anyone else on the way. There's only one track in and one track out to this place. When it got dark, I started a fire in the fireplace and had my dinner. I was tired, and I decided to go to sleep around 8:30 p.m. as I planned to get up early to walk back to my car early this morning. Around 1 a.m. I woke up to the sound of a loud machine, really loud, like being directly underneath a helicopter or something. When I peered through the hut's window, I could see bright lights flashing around, lighting up the trees. But I couldn't see the source of the light, which made me think that they were above me. There was no way I was going outside to investigate, so I just sat on a camp chair, wondering what the heck was outside. After a few minutes, both the sound and the light stopped suddenly, like they had never even been there. There was nowhere for anything to land nearby as the hut is in sort of a heavily treed area. After a few minutes, I got the courage to go outside with my head torch, and all I could see was some grass that had been slightly burned around the hut. Nothing else seemed to have been damaged or disturbed. I stayed up for the remainder of the night and left for my car just before daylight came. There's no way that a vehicle could get to that hut, and I don't think that a search and rescue would have a helicopter up at night in such a remote area. There's no Air Force bases nearby either. The national park doesn't allow hunters, so I really have no idea what it was or what was even going on. I don't drink, use drugs, and I'm not on any medication that could alter my perception. Any ideas what that could have been? Has anyone else had a similar unexplained encounter, particularly around the Canberra in Australia? Story number 19. Ghost Encounter. Back when I was a little girl, maybe around 4 or 5, I remember being at my stepdad's apartment with my mom and 2 stepsisters. Me and my stepsisters were playing with the computer when we heard a thump in the closet. This closet was located right behind the computer, but a wall was separating the closet from us. Anyways, we peek over to see a Halloween decor scarecrow peeking out of the now very open glass closet. It was facing us and leaning out sideways, like it was purposely looking at us. Of course, we screamed and called for our parents that were sitting in the balcony having a smoke. I know it might sound silly, but I'm very positive that it was a ghost or spirit because this apartment was frequently engaged with paranormal activity. Like drawers opening and doors slamming and footsteps in the middle of the night when everyone was asleep. I think about this so often. Not that I'm scared anymore, I'm just wondering if it was an encounter or something along the lines of that. Story number 20. When I was a freshman in university, the dorm I was in had laundry facilities in the basement. As I was lugging my clothes down to the basement hall, I noticed that there was a hatch in the tile hallway that made a hollow and a reverberating thud when stepped on. Being a dipshit freshman, I tried to open it. No luck though. The hatch was heavy and crusted over with disuse. Went upstairs, got a strong friend, and we lifted it together. Beneath it was near pitch darkness, but we'd just entered the age of flashlight apps for the phones. They didn't really have their own, so we lit it up and saw what looked like a dank, not that kind of dank, concrete shaft, covered in cobwebs, dust, and weirdly wet everywhere. It extended underneath the floor in one direction, with a drop-off in about 15 feet. So we gathered a few more brave souls, set my roommate as a lookout for staff, and in case the hatch slammed shut on us, and dropped in. We were surrounded by plumbing, and it smelled like it. We crawled forward and found that the drop-off was only a few feet, and there was a plastic chair at the base of it, presumably to help land and get back up. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. After we dropped down, the ceiling stayed the same height, so we could walk properly. It was a long walk, though, and ended with a metal door. Opening that, we found ourselves in what seemed to be the housekeeper's storage. Several expansive rooms of supplies, from toiletries to road salt to all sorts of cleaning and plumbing and electrical equipment. On the other side of the storage rooms, we opened another door and came out to the basement on the far side of the building. All told, no monsters, no chase scene, just dust and toiletries, which we stole a few of in case the dorm bathroom ever ran low, which it did. Made for an exciting Nerf war when we snuck up on our enemies from behind, since they expected us from the, being on our own side. Story number 21. This freaked me out, and I feel and think that this is a perfect place to tell the story. So this isn't directly my experience, but it's two separate experiences that happened, or rather I happened to hear about, and kind of freaking me out too. So to start, my brother, very young, still in the crib, would always tell us that there's ooh-oohs, is what he called them. He was literally one or two. Now, we figured that he was talking about shadows, because in the daytime he'd point out the ooh-oohs, so we thought nothing of it. A couple of months of these ooh-oohs, we put him to bed one night, and around 30 minutes after, we hear him crying. I woke up my parents, got out of bed, and we go into his room. He's somehow under the stretchy part of the bed lining, but the bed lining is still perfectly wrapped around all four corners, and the dog seemed off. Now, my brother was 16 when I randomly had a thought to ask him what those ooh-oohs, what they really were, and did he even remember them? And he told me yes. They were short shadow figure things with long beaks for faces. Now, many years after my brother's encounter, I was in high school. I was hanging out with my friends who never had met my brother because of the age gap, and we were talking about ghost experiences. And one said that he would see these figures walking around the neighborhood, and he only lived a mile or two away from me. I was being instantly interested, so I asked them what they looked like. And he said, yeah, they were little short black figures with long faces like a bird. And I was shocked. I told him what happened with my brother, and he didn't believe me, so I introduced my brother a couple of days after. And he told him, and yeah, everyone got freaked out. Nothing happened to me, but just hearing the same description from two people who don't know each other is absolutely creepy as hell. Story number 22. 3 paranormal things happened in the span of 30 minutes. Let me start off by saying a couple of things. I'm autistic, and I have a hard time narrowing down a story to a couple of lines. so this may be longer than it needs to be. Me and my mom are both believers. We have had plenty of experience with the paranormal in the past, and I've been open to the paranormal since a young age, whether that be shadow people, relatives that have passed on to come visit us, possessions, you name it. We've probably had some sort of an experience with it. I work as a delivery person. I deliver papers and ads in my city. I use a metal wagon cart to pull the papers and stuff them in, so that I can take more with me in one trip. I pull this behind me. It's kind of important to the story. I like to do this work in the evening because I like how quiet it is, and the fact that not many people are outside, so I can do my work in peace and to avoid talking to people. And this all happened in the span of 30 minutes, by the way. So, on to the encounters. The first paranormal thing that happened was a cold hand touched me on my right shoulder. It felt like a right hand. The hand was not icy cold, but as cold as a corpse, if that makes sense. It didn't put a lot of pressure on me. It was more as like to get my attention. Say you're walking behind someone and want their attention. I was pulling my cart behind me, so this simply wouldn't be possible for someone to touch my right shoulder with their right hand like that. I looked around in confusion, thinking to myself, okay, that's weird. I didn't see anyone or anything around me. The nearest people near me were across the parking lot. The second paranormal thing happened maybe 2 minutes after, on the same street as the first encounter. Just a little further away. I think they're related, but I'm not sure. There's a restaurant at the corner of my street in my town with automatic doors that you have to come closer to so that they'll open. You have to be within 1 to 2 meters of the door to register that it's a person, and then, in fact, open. I was walking 5 meters away from the door, and the door's open. I looked inside, didn't see anyone in the hallway. All I saw was the person at the register cleaning the counter. I walked past, not really thinking anything of it. I left my car at the corner of the street and crossed the street to deliver a few papers. I came back, grabbed another one for said restaurant, and went to put it in the mailbox. I turned to go, walk towards the mailbox, and I see the door opening again from quite far away. This time I was a good 7 meters away from the sensor, and behind a pillar that's in front of the restaurant, so I couldn't have triggered it. I walked around the pillar and felt something shoving and kicking me in the butt. It wasn't hard, and it also didn't hurt, but it was enough to make me stumble and force me to take another step. I look around me, and again, there was no one there. I thought maybe it was those people I saw in the parking lot earlier, but they were quite far away by then. I wasn't scared as much as I was unnerved. Those two things happened so close together. I called my mom right as this happened and told her what I was, kind of going through. And while on the phone with her, I continued to walk my route, and everything was fine. I moved on to the next section without anything else really happening, and I hung up. The third thing happened in the next section of my route, and completely freaked me out. One of the streets I have to deliver on is a cul-de-sac type of street. It goes downhill for a little bit and it wraps around some other houses and comes out on the other side of them. There is a lamp post shining its light into the street where the cul-de-sac begins. I entered the first part of the street that goes down and put my cart down so I could deliver some more houses. I was halfway down the street when I saw the train of a dress fly by around the corner where I just came from, up by the beginning of the cul-de-sac. I don't mean flying as if a person was hovering off the ground. I mean flying in the sense of a person was running past, and the train was following behind them. Think of a typical scary movie where a ghost runs around the corner and you just catch a glimpse of them. It wasn't an actual person because the light didn't get obstructed, but I just saw that dress. I quickly finished the street, grabbed my cart, and stood underneath a lamppost where I felt safe and called my mom. She told me that she was on her way already. Since our last call, she said that I sounded really scared and I sounded freaked out. And hearing me now, I was almost hyperventilating. I told her it wasn't necessary, and I'd stay in the streetlights, and in parts that were lit well. I would do them tomorrow during the day. She then came to me anyways, and came with me as I finished the rest of my route. I was mostly done anyways, so it wasn't too long. When we came home, we looked some things up about it, and we tried a few things to protect me from the paranormal entities. I'm wearing my crystal bracelets again, and I will not be taking them off for a week. I personally think the first two incidents are related. Maybe the cold hand was trying to warn me for the push and kick I would receive a little later. Or they were trying to get my attention with their hand when I didn't respond, and gave me a shove to get my attention further. For the third thing, though, I don't know, it really just freaked me out and I can't connect them. I am freaked out and I'm still quite anxious about the whole thing. For now, I will not be doing my work during the evening, and I'll be doing it during the day. That's the end of tonight's stories. As usual, hope that you guys drop a comment and help us along with growing this channel, and I'll see you later. See ya.